This video is brought to you by my patrons and by viewers like you. Greetings, groovy people. Welcome to Blue Dragon Art. I'm the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. I laugh when I say it. I'm sorry, because I know it's silly. This is an art-related channel. I talk about different art-related topics, obviously, and this time I'm going to be talking about a character from my free Not Safe for Work webcomic, Dark Horse. It is a post-apocalyptic magical girl fantasy. It is not safe for work, as is this channel. I cuss like a sailor, and then like a lot of the topics, especially that are going to be covered in Dark Horse, they're not like appropriate for younger audiences. So, I'm going to be talking about a character that years ago I intended to do an entire video on. It's Oisin. There's actually two pronunciations, the Gaelic pronunciation or Gaelic, however you pronounce that. I say Gaelic, but the Gaelic pronunciation is Oisin, and then like the anglicized version of it is how I always pronounce it on this channel because that's what I grew up with, and that's Oisin. Both are kind of correct, but if you want to be a little bit more accurate regarding the Irish/Gaelic pronunciation, it is Oisin.
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 Yeah.
In this video, I am also going to link a video that I did a couple years ago for St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to have that down in the description. But in this video, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about the character because he's finally getting like a lot more screen time, so to say. He's finally going to be a part of the main comic. We've kind of had him in like a couple chapters. I had him in like Act 2, and I had him in a couple other acts. You know, you see him here and there. But the character is now going to be one of the main characters. That's not really a spoiler. I'm going to talk about why I chose to make this character the specific background, mixture of nationalities that he is. I'm going to go over like the symbolism behind his name, and then I'm going to talk about like the character's background, a little bit about his personality, and then I'm also going to just kind of go into like language and stuff, and I just really want to like kind of round him out. I know that I feel like I've done videos about other characters in the past, and I know that I was going to do like kind of a character spotlight on him, but I either got busy or I wanted to wait until he was actually going to be in the comic proper for a much longer period of time. So, without further ado, I just want to warn you, this is going to be like a very babbly video, okay? So, if you just want to have some noise in the background, you're not going to be like getting any art tips or anything like that. I'm just going to be talking about the specific character. That's the focus of this video. Okay, so I want to try to not go too long about this because this is like my fourth time recording this video. I just keep going on, and I really don't need to, but the character in question, his biography is that he was born in Ireland around Belfast, and then when he was a young child, his mother moved with him to live with cousins in Glasgow, Scotland. And the reason why I want this character to be like a mixture of these two nationalities is because, as with all of my characters, I like my characters to have like a blended background because it's representative of me and I feel a good portion of the United States. And, you know, the way I was brought up, it was very important to like both celebrate your own culture as well as other people's cultures. So with characters like Rhiannon, it's not always obvious, but she's actually like third generation Japanese American. Like her grandparents were from Japan, but they had moved to the States, and then like her mother was born in the United States, and then she is like, what, I guess that would be like third generation, even though her father is actually of like a Welsh background, which is why her name is Rhiannon. Kana is also going to have like kind of a stereotypical white background. Not everyone, obviously, but like her background is going to be of an ancestry that's Polish and German, and so on and so forth. There's other characters, and I really like to have that representation because I like the concept of reflecting how diverse the United States actually is, even if it's people like me who's sadly very detached from a lot of that ancestry, but was raised to appreciate it and be interested in it, if that makes sense. So when we're talking about Oisin, now his personality is not going to be reflective mostly of mine. I don't smoke cigarettes. This character smokes. I am sorry if you smoke, you guys. I am disgusted by the smell of cigarettes. Pot smoke, okay. Cigarette smoke makes me gag. Maybe that comes from like my waitress days back when I was a teenager, but at any rate, the character is not necessarily reflective of me in personality, but I really found it to be important to have an Irish and Scottish character because I was one of those kids that if asked, what my ancestry was, I would rattle it off: English, Irish, Scottish, and Filipino. Although Filipina would actually be more accurate. At the time, I didn't know that. So, to me, it's very important for this character to represent that part of my ancestry. I grew up around people in the United States who, for instance, I mentioned this in that older video from several years ago. My cousin, she's like a year younger than me. And at the age of 9, she started learning how to play the bagpipes. She started on a chanter, then graduated to the bagpipes proper. And I would go with her, because we were the two youngest of the 4 girls who lived on the property. I palled around with my sister and my older cousin also, but she and I were a lot closer just because it was kind of, we broke off into the big kids and the little kids is what we said. But yeah, I would hang out with her at like the Highland Games. I would see her perform. She had a kilt. She had the sporran. She had the tam. She had the whole fucking 9 yards. And I was raised around that kind of blend of Irish and Scottish because, well, there are different types of bagpipes. There's the traditional larger Scottish bagpipes and then the smaller Irish ones. I don't know if they have a different name than bagpipes. I can't remember. But what I grew up around was kind of like these events, like these ceilidhs and things and these Highland Games was a blend of both Irish and Scottish heritage. Also, the thing that I learned as I grew older was that, and I don't know if this is true of other Americans, other U.S. citizens, but there's a very, I feel, misrepresented idea of what the Scottish people are like in present day. At least growing up around that when I was younger, I had this idea of all Scottish people being rebellious like William Wallace. And I think a lot of that, I don't know, this is just a theory, I think a lot of that is because the Irish and Scottish folks, a lot of them who came to the United States were fleeing English colonialism, which if you know anything about Irish history, and Scottish too, but Irish in particular, is fucking horrific, okay? The shit that the English did, they did it to everyone. They did it to India. They did it everywhere they went. They did it to parts, obviously, of Africa, different nations in Africa. And we all know about the potato famine and how incredibly unnecessary it was. They'd done the same thing in India, again, just for pure profit, keeping food from people so that they could sell it and make more money. There really didn't need to be famines in either of those places. But I think that we have in the United States this stereotype of the rugged Highland Scottish who were able to fend off the English. And we just think everyone in modern day Scotland is like that. At least I romanticized Scotland that way. And then as I grew older, I realized, dude, Scotland is way more complex than that in present day. And a lot of that revolutionary spirit did actually come over to the United States. But the point is that I wanted a character that would at least kind of address some of that rebellious side. And this character, Oisin, is very much a representation of at least that ancestry, though he himself is going to be very different from any of that, especially since, he was raised in Scotland. I'm moving along here now to his name. His full name is Robert Oisin Gallagher, and each part of his name, again, much like my other characters, every part of that name has some kind of symbolism and meaning for me, and or for the character. For instance, while Oisin goes by his middle name, his first given name was actually Robert, and there were 2 reasons for that. This specific character's father is going to have been part of the IRA, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. As a sign of pride for a cultural icon in Scotland, I named him after a combination of Robert Burns. He is an icon in Scotland. He wrote a lot of poetry in Scots Lead and Scots English, and I'm going to talk about those languages in just a moment. But also, he was like the pride of the nation. He is the poet that a lot of folks talk about and kind of hail if you go over there to Scotland. He's someone who's very like iconic and legendary. Robert Sands is the other character that Oisin is named after, his first name. And he's a little bit more of a controversial person because he was an active member of the Irish Republican Army, which is the IRA, the Provisional Irish Republican Army. And this to me is like an important thing to represent, because when we think about like what the English did to Ireland, if you're not particularly familiar with the history, then you might kind of glaze over and think, oh, well, that's all ancient history. But even as not that long ago as like the 1970s, 1972, there were English soldiers who had shot people. It was called Bloody Sunday. And there's several songs about it. Most of you out there probably know the U2 song. But at the time period, even people like the Beatles, they'd already broken up, obviously, by then. But Paul McCartney had written Give Ireland Back to the Irish in response to this. John Lennon wrote 2 songs. He wrote The Luck of the Irish, which is a satirical take on The Luck of the Irish, which is quite often how I use that phrase because it's not very lucky at all.
If you had the luck of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead.
And then he also wrote a song, Bloody Sunday.
Is there anyone amongst you dare to blame it on the kids? Not a soldier boy was bleeding when they nailed the coffin lid.
So, I mean, it was really not even that long ago that there was still a lot of like horrible things happening at the hands of the English. And I'm not going to sit here and wax lyrical on the IRA. I don't know enough about the history to feel comfortable saying if I support this person or the other, but I will say it was a response to the treatment of the Irish people and people wanting to have a united Ireland once again instead of having a Northern Ireland and a Southern Ireland, or just mainland Ireland, I should say. It's not called South Ireland. But for this specific character, this person, Robert Sands, would probably have, well, definitely would have been a contemporary of Oisin's father. And so that is someone that his father had named his child after. Oisin is a little bit older than Odysseus and Conna and Rena, whereas they were all born in like the early to mid 1980s. I need to rework what year he was born. Robert Sands died in 1981, so I want Oisin to definitely be a solid Gen X character, and initially I'd had him born in 1980, but then realized that he would be way too young to have the history that I want him to have. So I haven't picked his exact birth year yet, but it's going to be sometime in the 1970s, probably the mid-70s. Yeah, I just need to do a little bit more research before I pin down his age so that I can, like, update his biography. Oisin's middle name is actually one that is very important to me personally. I picked that name because, like, one of my first introductions to Gaelic mythology and folklore was through this animated cartoon called Fairies, which was an 80s, oh god, it might have been late 70s too, but I think it was released in the 80s.
Come, mortal. Arise, fairies, and dance.
We used to check it out from the video store all the time until finally Mom was like, okay, I'm just gonna fucking record this. I'm recording this onto a blank VHS because she's watching this too much. But Fairies was based on Brian Froud's book that he released in like the late 1970s, I think, maybe mid 1970s. I need to double check the dates, but I grew up with that book too. But Oisin is like a famous, oh my gosh, he was like a famous hunter. And the story goes that he had at some point stumbled into a fairy ring or something along these lines. And he either met or saved the daughter of the fairy king, whose name is Neve. I say Neem a lot because, again, it gets anglicized and mispronounced, and that's what I was raised with. But Neve was the daughter of the fairy king, and eventually he goes to the land of the young, which is Tir na Nog, and he lives there for quite a long time. But because it is the land of the young, when he leaves to return to the human world, he's like an old man. And I guess he gets brought back into Tir na Nog. I guess he marries Neve at some point. So, but he is a famous Celtic hero. He's a famous mythological person or person from folklore. Well, obviously. Maybe he existed, but obviously I don't think there were any fairies involved with it. But because I grew up with that cartoon, and because my mother had actually named me a name that is similar in sound but not in meaning, like if she had had her way, if my dad hadn't thrown a fit, my name would have not been spelled phonetically. It would have been Aislinn or Aisling, which is how you spell Ashleen. But at any rate, Ashleen and the anglicized Oisin always kind of rhymed. And because I'd never, there was nobody ever I've never met another Ashleen. Okay, you guys, never met another one. So being raised with this folklore and with this character that also had a name that I've never seen anyone else have, it was kind of like, I don't know, it was really special to me, even though the character was male. Like, I'm the kind of person that I can relate to male, female, non-gendered. If the character is experiencing things, I can relate to them. And so I really loved that character and that cartoon, and I knew when I started working on this comic seriously that I was going to have to name a character Oisin, which I now know is pronounced differently if you're doing it right, but at any rate, that's where he got his middle name from, which is the name that he chose to go by as kind of a connection and remembrance of his Irish ancestry. Not because he didn't dislike Robert, but Oisin is a lot more, I don't know, it's a lot more mythical. This character who is very boisterous and very jovial and very, very confident, very self-confident. He's kind of a ladies' man. For this specific character, it was more meaningful for him to go by like this ancient, well-known mythological person versus going by a more modernized person. Not that to say that the character doesn't like literature, but he's like a punk rocker. He's very chaotic. He's very much, not a nihilist. He's an anarchist, and I'm going to get to him working in the government. Don't worry. It sounds silly, but he was, at least in his younger days, an anarchist punk rocker. So yeah, he decided to go by his middle name instead of like his first name, because Robert doesn't sound nearly as epic as Oisin. And then his last name is Gallagher for the stupidest reason, you guys. The reason why is because I like the Gallagher brothers, who their parents are Irish immigrants. This is a story similar to even John Lennon, where a lot of Irish immigrants would move to England for jobs or whatnot. And that was the case with Oasis. If you don't know who the Gallagher brothers are, Oasis were not Beatle. They are musicians in their own right, but you can't deny that there's a Beatle influence there in Oasis, especially when you got one of the lead singers saying he's the reincarnation of John Lennon, even though he was born before John Lennon was assassinated. He was born before John. Probably probably just trying to be controversial. Liam is something else. He is a fucking hot mess, y'all. But I would love to see Oasis in concert, and I think I missed it. Motherfuck. I'll never get to see them, which makes me sad. But at any rate, that's where I got his last name. Not from the dude who smashes watermelons, but from the Gallagher brothers, because it's got to always come back to the Beatles or Beatle influence, okay? Okay. So the character's background, we're going to move along to Oisin's background. I mentioned that he was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I chose that because, well, it's a well-known city in Northern Ireland, but also there's a tiny bit more of a personal connection. My cousin who played the bagpipes, their specific bagpipe band had a drummer who was not Scottish. He was from Ireland and he was from Belfast, and I loved the shit out of this guy. He was so fucking funny. He was the one who they always got to sing like the 7 Drunken Nights, which if you haven't heard that song, it is hilarious. I'm sorry. I love Irish folk music because it's a combination of both sad and funny. Like, you've got your sad, morose songs, but then you've also got your shit like this guy. Every single night he comes home drunk and his wife has replaced something of his with some other dudes, but he's too fucking drunk to know it. It's hilarious. It's a funny song. But that guy, you know, he was such a nice guy and he was very funny. And when we'd go to Kaylee's and stuff, he was like always like really nice and really funny, and I liked this guy. He was such a character. So I specifically chose Belfast because of that very, very distant personal connection to Ireland through this person that was really not my friend. I mean, he was just one of the adults that were around, you know, but he was always nice to me and I always thought he was funny. So that's why I picked Belfast. And then, like, well, I'm not sure if this is going to be in the comic proper. You'll probably find out at some point, or maybe I'll have a side story. I don't know. But the reason why his mother ended up moving, I think I just mentioned this earlier, but because his father was active in the IRA, he's going to have basically died from this resistance movement. And in order to help raise her son, she moves to Glasgow to be around family. She's got a big family in Glasgow, and so Oisin, while he ends up not having any like actual blood brother and sisters, he will be raised in Glasgow among folks who are around his age, and he's going to consider that extended family of cousins to be more like brothers and sisters. He's actually kind of a radical character. I mentioned that I definitely have him in a punk band. He's actually going to be a character that is atheist. I don't want him to be like a stereotype of Ireland and Scotland. He's not going to be Church of England. He's not going to be Protestant. He's not going to be Catholic. He's going to be straight up an atheist. And I just like to have like a variety of characters, even though I myself am not an atheist. I think it's important to like try to make your characters as representative of reality as you can. And so I feel it would be kind of disingenuous to make this specific character be Catholic or be some other religion, because I really feel like what I'm channeling through him with his rebellious nature and with his anarchy is it doesn't feel right that he would be obliged to some kind of organized religion. I mean, it'll probably come up at some point. He'll probably be a smartass about it with a character like Kana, who was like super uber fucking Catholic. Possibly with Rin, who's more non-denominational, hand wavy, you know, believes but isn't like, you know, they don't go to church or shit like that. I kind of wanted that to be a part of his character. The other element, specifically regarding him being like in a punk rock band and being a punk rocker, and the type of clothes that I will most of the time have him in, is going to be like evocative of like the punk movement, which if you know about actual punk and what it stems from, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I don't know like the entire history, but I know there's like proto-punk. There's bands like Death from, I believe they're from Michigan. They're from the United States, but they had released their album. And then you've got like Iggy Pop that is like proto-punk, but these bands where punk stemmed from. And of course, the bands that, you know, are European, like you got the Clash or you got the Sex Pistols, they're British. The punk movement is very much a working class counterculture movement. And those are also like bands that I personally like. I like punk music. I like later punk music too. I like, you know, some NoFX. I like, you know, some Dead Kennedys. God, a lot of those punk bands kind of sound like Geddy Lee, you know, from Rush, only they're singing punk music. But I digress. I like a lot of punk music. I particularly listen to a lot of European punk, English bands, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. But I also listen to a ton of Irish punk bands and Irish American punk bands. So I'm going to do like a little clip of some of my Irish bands that I like. And also Irish American, because I got the Dropkick Murphys in there and they're not from Ireland. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about like the fashion and stuff.
But I'll Coot Cullen, well kneel and say a prayer. But the ghosts are rattling at the door and the devil's in that chair. It's not a rebel die, you're some socialistic. The cross for you men run. Come on, you roots, you radicals, you rock to the reggae roots. But don't let heroes get your kicks for you. It's up to you and no
This movement was, you know, from people who were working class. I mean, especially if you're listening to shit that the early Clash are singing about. Very anti-fascist, very pro-labor, very against, like, the establishment.
Boys and girls, all the power in the hands of the people reaching out to buy it. While we walk the street, to get to even dry it.
So the thing about like the punk rock aesthetic is that the whole punk movement is very do it yourself. And a lot of that stems from being from the working class. There were a lot of people who were trying to like just repair their clothes the way they could. That's something that like Johnny Rotten had said. He's from the Sex Pistols. But in addition to that, as the movement evolved, the whole point of like wearing like your clothes with rips in it and tears and having holes in your jeans, people weren't like buying their clothes like that, but they were certainly not like the point is that it was very counterculture at the time, because I mean, even today, I mean, maybe things are getting more lax. I know that, like, the dress code, at least where my partner works now, has been relaxed a little bit. But, like, in the working world, I would say even, obviously now, to this day, there is, like, a dress code. And you have to dress, quote-unquote, respectably. So, part of, like, the punk movement is a little bit of it being like a whole economic statement based on you being part of the working class. Another part of it was also tied into being working class, that do-it-yourself nature of things. And then couple all that with like anti-establishment. I'm wearing my anti-establishment look on my body. I'm not buying it at Hot Topic. I'm just wearing like people would like make comments, like people who are like from an upper crust or upper class would look down on people who are more punk, if that makes sense. I mean, especially for like a post-apocalyptic setting, I felt like it would be reasonable for Oisin to have like still that punk aesthetic, to still have like the haircut that's a little odd that Odysseus pokes fun at. You know, he doesn't have like a mohawk or anything like that, but he does have, you know, like his hair is like a little bit, you know, cut in a strange way. And his clothes are being held together by safety pins, and he's got holes and shit in his clothes. That wasn't like a thing to like, it's similar to like how we stereotype hippies now, like, oh, you go to the store and you buy this hippie clothes. Like, even that counterculture movement was getting textiles and things that were like cheap and also like very deliberately against what was considered proper and establishment at the time. It was very radical. And then of course capitalism does what capitalism does, and it like takes over that look and then commodifies it and sells it to you. And then it's no longer something that is counterculture, in my opinion, at that point, which is kind of what has happened to punk, where it's like people will buy Misfit shirts and they don't even listen to the Misfits. That's a band I'm really not a personal fan of. I've heard a few of their songs and I'm not really a fan of them, but like people wear the shirts because it's cool and it's punk, and a lot of people don't listen to the music, or they'll go and they'll get their pants pre-ripped, and it's like, that's not why people had holes in their clothes. It was a statement of both the economic class they were a part of. It was also like dressing in that fashion to be anti-establishment. They weren't buying their clothes like that. You know what I'm saying? Although, of course, you know, you are going to be buying like your spiked collars. I mean, that has an obvious, you can see why that's considered anti-establishment. But yeah, I find that to be important to kind of reflect that in a lot of the clothing of this character, because he is very anti-establishment. And even in the early 90s and mid 90s, like that whole grunge look, it was also counterculture. The punk look had, you know, was kind of getting not so much commodified. Maybe it had been by that point. I don't know. But like the new thing was the grunge look. That was what was counterculture. And I could get into that. I get into a little bit of like the baby doll dresses that you see bands like Hole wearing. Not Hole, the whole band. Not the whole band. Courtney Love. There were men in that band too. I mean, but you know, they might have been wearing dresses. Kurt Cobain and David Grohl both were wearing dresses on stage as a statement against the establishment and gender, you know, conformity and shit like that. Like, they were not, you know, obviously they weren't non-binary or anything, but if you hear Kurt Cobain talking, like all of that, they weren't going and buying it at like a specific place. It was all making a statement against what was expected and what you were supposed to look like and how you were supposed to dress. And the commentary is that it doesn't fucking matter. I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to follow your rules. And that same ideal was true with like the punk rockers, which came, you know, were like the predecessors to grunge music and everything. But yeah, anyway, that I wanted to kind of explain why his clothes look like that. Not all of his clothes are going to be full of holes, but in a post-apocalyptic setting, whereas there are going to be a lot of abandoned textiles and clothes from like the malls around the country, I'm going to imagine that there are going to be people who either didn't have access to it or just, you know, everything was grabbed up, or they just don't give a fuck and they're just wearing the same shit. You know, I don't think it would be unusual to think that people in the future would still have clothing that is going to have holes in it, even if you do have access to things that have been abandoned by a reduced population, if that makes sense. At some point, I am going to address in the comic how he is reconciling the whole concept of being anti-establishment and in this newly formed temporary government being considered the quote-unquote general, but that's not for this video. It is something that I have on my mind and that I am going to be considering within the story, but this is not the video to go into all the contradictions there, okay? One of the things that I think is going to be the hardest and I need to address, maybe in the comic, I'm doing it a little bit, but I really don't like to hold people's hands. I really like to, because I'm curious and because I get interested in things and start looking shit up myself, I don't want to like hold people's hands and say this, that, and the other, but the reason why Oisin speaks so strangely sometimes is because this specific character, again, I've mentioned that like modern Scotland is very diverse and very complicated. There's the people who are just kind of, they consider England to be kind of like a friendly rivalry, and they're not so, they don't care. I mean, they care, but they're not so upset about being part of Great Britain. But then you've got like the other people who are very much against the colonialism that was forced upon them by the English. And this is one of those characters. In Scotland, I want to say that this is true of Ireland too, but so language is extremely important to a culture and a people. I don't think that I'm saying anything special when I mention that. And one way that colonizers will try to force assimilation or take over a people is by disenfranchising them from their native languages. The United States is 100% fucking guilty of that with indigenous folks here. We have tried to quash native languages and force peoples to learn only English and erase that part of their culture that was, imperative to their people. One of the first times that I, as an adult, realized this was a thing, because I was an English major. I was an English and art major. I was also an environmental science major, but that's another story that I've told a billion times. But at any rate, I settled on English. So I was a big fan of literature, and I used to be a super fucking grammar Nazi. But the older I got, the more I realized that a living language, if it's not going to be a dead language, it's something that evolves and changes, and it's colloquial. And, people in the southern part of the United States has a certain way of speaking. People up in the, New England area, they have words and a certain way of speaking. People in California and the Midwest, people all over the country just naturally evolve a language to kind of fit their area. Like a lot of people who aren't from the Midwest don't say ope. I say ope all the fucking time. It's just kind of a weird interjection that you do if you like bump into someone, you're like, ope, sorry about that. It was just something that you just kind of do and you don't even know you're doing it. But at any rate, like, as I grew older and learned more about language and got better acquainted with different types of literatures, I didn't have to read Ulysses, but Ulysses is infamous. Ulysses is very infamous for being nonsense, but also having tons of different languages. Also learning, like, I've read a lot of Eliot. Eliot was actually one of my favorite poets. He was an American, but he moved over to England. And the thing about Eliot that I really liked was that he was constantly interjecting Latin, French, and so many other different languages and allusions to different literatures into his poetry. Even now, I don't understand everything that he has made allusions to. But in his own way, even though it's very high tower, I appreciated that kind of blending of different languages and cultures into his poetry. And when I was in college, I had also taken a memoirs class. And we had to read a lot of different, like, actual memoirs from people. Hell, I can't remember. I don't think that was where I was introduced to Mouse, which is a form of memoir, even though it's graphic novel. But I do know that we read a fictional memoir that was loosely based on some of the author's personal experiences. Most of it was considered fictional, but it was based in reality. And it was called Lost Names, and it was about what the Japanese did to the Koreans during World War II. And they did this to other cultures as well, but this specific character was from Korea. And much like the English and much like the United States, what Japan was doing when they took over parts of Korea is they would give the Koreans Japanese names, force them to learn Japanese, and basically the reason why it's called Lost Names is because at the end of it, the character couldn't remember what his Korean name was. And this is like a tactic that colonizers will do to, again, take away someone else's culture and force them to assimilate with their own. Now, why am I getting into all of this discussion about language and America and England and Japan? The point is, the English did this to people in Ireland and Scotland. And I believe at one point it was considered illegal to not speak English. They tried to kill the Gaelic language. And in Scotland, there were actually two different languages. There was Scots Lead and Scots Gaelic. When you talk about Gaelic, that language came from the Celts, the Celtic, versus Scots Lead, which came from a Germanic background. There's a couple different branches of languages that all languages stem from. And in Scotland, I guess because of like the Norse influence, I think that's where Scots Lead came from. But in Scotland, it's very much a class thing. There's like a division. There's the people who are like, and I'm not shitting on anyone, okay? I'm just talking about this. There's people who are like, you need to speak proper English. You need to speak proper English so you can get a job. You need to speak proper English so that you can be respected and look educated. And then you've got people who are more working class, and colloquially you speak something called Scots English, which is an amalgamation of Scots Lead and English, which is what Oisin is speaking. And sometimes it's because, that's just the colloquial language of the working class. And then there's also a very nationalist undercurrent of people who are trying to keep Scots Lead and Scots English alive as a form of rebellion and rejection of the English language and English colonization.
Doesn't it make you proud to be Scottish?
It's shite being Scottish! We're the lowest of the low! The scum of the fucking earth! The most wretched, miserable, servile, pathetic trash that was ever shot into civilization! Some people hate the English, I don't. They're just wankers. We, on the other hand, are colonised by wankers. Can't even find a decent culture to be colonised by. We're ruled by effete arseholes. It's a shite state of affairs to be in, Tommy, and all the fresh air in the world won't make any fucking difference.
So that's what I'm talking about. Like, it's very complicated, and there's people in the middle. There's people who just speak it because that's what we're speaking at the pub. And then there's people who speak it because fuck the English. And then there's the people who are like, you should sound more intelligent than that. You need to speak proper English. And I'm not villainizing anyone. And I'm sure there's other stuff that I'm not covering because I am not Scottish and I am not from there. But I've been trying to do like my research, and with Oisin, the reason why I have a couple pages where he is speaking specifically in this Scots English, mostly so that he can kind of irritate Odysseus, because Odysseus is not at all, he's like your typical American, like me. I was unfamiliar with what the fuck Scots Lead was, or Scots English, but I watched shit like Train Spotting, and you hear people not really speaking an English that you recognize. And that film, which deals with a lot of people who are impoverished, it starts like with this whole monologue about choose life.
Choose life. Choose a job. Choose a career. Choose a family.
And how you got everything fucking standing up against you. A lot of times when you have people who are in these situations, they do, much like in Train Spotting, become addicted to drugs like heroin, and other drugs were done in that film as well. But the point is, I want this character to be that embodiment of fuck this, fuck England, took my fucking dad, I'm raised in Scotland, they've pretty much assimilated this country that he also believes is a part of his culture and heritage. And so when he's speaking Scots English, I know that I'm walking like a very fine line between representation and homage and also caricature. I know that I need to be careful, and I'm doing my best to be careful with this character. But there is such thing as like, I know like being an English major, being a literature major, I know that caricature is something that I need to be careful of also. Things like, we discuss that when we talk about books like Huckleberry Finn, where Big Jim has a very, very stereotyped way of speaking. It's difficult, what is caricature? What is representation? When is it insulting? When is it trying your best to like educate people on how a specific character speaks? And that's part of why throughout the comic, I want him to not, like, a lot of times you'll hear Rena, she's constantly saying gonna and contractions and speaking very improper English. I try to have her use like me and so-and-so instead of so-and-so and I. I do that intentionally to kind of replicate how different people have different speech patterns. Odysseus tends to speak a little bit more proper English because, and this isn't a video about him, but like he's got like a stigma having like, you know, been raised by a single mother also in Chicago, very impoverished. He has something to prove, and that's kind of why he's an overachiever in studies. That's what he was doing. He was very interested in education and making himself as smart as he could be to kind of counteract that stereotype of, I don't know a good term for it, but being poor and uneducated. And then you got Kana, who speaks very prim and proper, does not really use contractions, use mother and father around her parents, but then when she's around Rena, she still is a little stilted, but she does speak way less proper American English when she's around her friends. So that's something that I'm trying to like keep in mind when I write the characters, just so that I can kind of represent how different people have different speech patterns. And I've introduced the concept of Scots English with Oisin, and I'm not going to say that there won't be other phrases. He might say something like bairn, which is a word for, you know, like baby or child. That might pop up at some point. But for the most part, I just want to kind of have it like here and there. And then he's going to have like kind of an amalgamation of like Scottish and whatever the fuck slang he's picked up from like living in LA for a while. But yeah, I hope that kind of better explains what this character is about and explain why in some of the bubbles he's a little hard to understand. I am going to actually put like a translation, have like a little informational blurb on some of my websites about what he's saying. I did it on my main website in the comments. I gave a translation of what he's saying. But I think it would be better like on Tapas and Comic Fury to just... I'm going to have like a break because I'm going to be out of town. So I'm going to like put together some informational stuff to just kind of give the reader an idea that this is intentional. And he actually is speaking a language. He's not just uneducated. He doesn't not know how to speak English. It is a very intentional choice on this character to speak like that. But yeah, I hope that kind of gives a little bit more into like this character's background. I want to try to do more character background videos at some point, but I can't remember who all I've done. I may have done Rena already, probably. I've probably done Kana, maybe. I would need to go back and check my videos, but maybe it would be good to have like a refresher or build on to what I've already said or something like that. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm going to go ahead and close this video. I'm going to try to get another video out in February, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. But I'm going to be discussing some new programs that I've been learning, DaVinci Resolve and also Clip Studio Paint, which for those of you who didn't know, that's what I was working in the background when I'm, you know, whatever's in the background of this video, it's me working on pages in Clip Studio Paint. I've got all that audio recorded. I'm going to try to get it out before I leave. I'm helping my family pack and move to Oregon from Illinois. So it's gonna be some physical labor. We'll see. I'll try to be back with another video, but I may be sporadic or gone in the month of March. If so, that's just how it is. I don't know. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and close though, because I've talked enough. Peace and love. Fare you well, and keep on trucking.